All right, everybody. We are beginning our latest episode of the Safety Extreme podcast for the week of October 10th, 2021. We have a new series we're going to be starting up, but as always, I am Josh Bycer from Game Wisdom, and joining me, my co-host from Nexus Games, or soon to be, I guess, title pending, Sharky.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. And we have the meme of, can we get the new name for the company and a logo? And working on it.
We actually have two memes today, as we're going to be starting our series examining genres, kind of breaking down the popular trends and seeing where things have gone and where they could go in the future. And what would be the best one to start with would be the ever popular question,
What
what
is
is
a
a
rogue?
roguelike? Exactly.
What is
And
a rogue? I hope everybody brought their memes.
mhm. So the roguelike genre has been one of the longest running ones. It is the subject of my third book, Game Design Deep Dive Roguelikes. So if you're interested in further answering that question, be sure to pick that one out or pick that one up. But
But the question is, does your book answer the question, what is a rogue?
yes, it does. So you have to buy at least 5 copies so to get all the answers. So the genre itself has seen new life and has really shifted in terms of its terminology and its approach over the last, I guess we could say, 40 years of its existence. So most people, at least most people in the mod audience, like if you started playing roguelikes over the last 5, 10 years, most likely you started with NFTL, Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, or even more quote unquote contemporary examples like Slay the Spire, Monster Train, Hades. But the
Dead Cells.
genre, yeah, but the genre as a whole is nothing like those games, or at least what people consider to be traditional roguelikes, or what they consider to be like the true definition of it. And that goes back to the days of, well, Rogue, NetHack, Umoria, and there's a lot of classic roguelikes. The genre never really died. It just never really blew up in the mainstream in that classical sense.
So basically, it evolved into shoot off genres. which
Mm-hmm.
we call, roguelike and roguelite, which are very, very confusing because
Mm-hmm.
they sound almost the exact same. You have R, rogue, and then LITE, and then LIKE.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, could they not get any less confusing terms like rogue similar and rogue adjacent or something rather
Mm-hmm.
than rogue like and rogue light?
What about a Rogue Metroid Vania? Would that be too confusing?
Not at all. Hey,
Hey,
Anton.
Anton. Thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying it. And hopefully the jump scare I put in the book doesn't get you.
Or maybe hopefully it does. Why'd you
Bum,
put it
bum,
in there if
bum.
you weren't trying to
Yeah.
get people?
Yeah. And the problem though is that for the developers who don't consider like modern day roguelikes, roguelites, deck builders, action, whatever you want to describe it, they don't consider them to be true roguelikes. So for them, a roguelike is essentially it is a top-down game. It is turn-based, specifically Wego style, and there is an emphasis on replayability, proc gen, and you the difficulty that that is give or take. That's one of the more interesting aspects I'm sure we'll touch on at length during this episode. But the whole Wego style. This is the question I have for you and for the audience. What do you think about Wego turn based? And what that means for people who don't know is that everything moves concurrently. So it's not like I move my character and then you move your character. It's I move my character and the exact same time everybody moves their character.
I'm personally not a fan of it.
Hmm.
Not anything against it or anything. It's just not my cup of tea because like when I think turn based and planning my moves out and everything,
Hmm.
I want to plan for my opponent's future moves, not my opponent's current moves. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I just feel like that it's just not my kind of strategy.
And it is a very like if you're not used to it, it's very awkward to play a game around this because, like you said, you're not planning moves in advance. You're planning your current move, and it it's kind of like that whole like pausable real time uh, that we see in a lot of or we see in certain RPGs. And I'm not a big fan of pausable real time. I think like for me, it's like either I want to be fully real time or I want complete turn based. I don't want some mixture of the two.
I think a mixture of the two can be good if it's done right, like
Hmm.
FTL.
Hmm. Or maybe something like Valkyria Chronicles in a
Yeah,
more abstracted sense.
yeah. But like
Yeah.
the other thing I don't like about the WeGo kind of thing is I've noticed just from like when you play those games because I really don't
Hmm.
play the WeGo ones. When
Hmm.
you play them, I just all the time when I see it, it's like they're just dancing around. You're just dancing around the circle.
Hmm.
It feels like a game of
Rodeo.
ring around the rosy, pocket full
Hmm.
of toesies, kind of thing. You just see, I'll move one space away, you move one space behind me, and just you can infinitely run away, and it's like there's not much threat there if you know how to properly skirt the enemies.
Yeah.
And
Or you get that one enemy just refuses to get into the alignment, and then you're spending like an extra 30 seconds, trying to get into that right angle to hit them.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just it doesn't feel good to me personally.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I said, like at the start, roguelikes in that style, they never died. It never went away. People didn't just, one day say, we don't want to make these games anymore. They have been popular among their audience, again, for about 40 years now. But when we look at kind of the mainstream, I think this will kind of be a running theme for the series, is how much does the mainstream understand or appreciate the genre? And for the mainstream, traditional roguelikes just weren't all that interesting to them. The probably like the one exception, or the one that kind of had the biggest breakout in the 90s and the early 2000s, would be the Mystery Dungeon series. This was done by, I believe it's a Chunsoft, and they made the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. They made Shiren the Wanderer. They're basically like the one developer who made all these games in Japan. And the things that kind of separated the Mystery Dungeon series from traditional roguelikes, one was a greater use of aesthetics. Like, if you remember when we played Shiren the Wanderer on stream a few months ago, that does not look like ASCII graphics. That looks like a very well, at least for the time, aesthetically pleasing game. But the other aspect is kind of, and I think this will be another major trend we'll be discussing in this episode, is the use of persistence. And persistence has become one of the more polarizing aspects of roguelike and roguelite design. This idea that you bring carryover from run to run, that you're not just starting back at zero. And I guess here's another question for you and for the audience. What do you think about games like the roguelike genre that you die and you're back at zero? It could be a new world, things obviously can be procedurally generated, but in terms of your progress, it's gone. See you later.
In general, I'm not a fan of it. There are exceptions like FTL. Like, I dearly love FTL, one of my top games of all times, and it does that very thing. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't find any other good examples like that I really like. It's just FTL, nothing else. Like, the even all the FTL clones kind of thing and inspired games and all that, not floating my boat. Nothing that completely reset progress besides FTL ever spoke to me. So like, not a big fan of that area. On the other hand, when you talk about the persistence and everything, there's far more of those games that definitely attracted me. Not a whole lot, but I think the number one killer for those games is when they build it so you have to play through like so many hundreds of or thousands of times before you can actually beat it, where they make it grindy for the sake of grind and padding out, and just like that does not work at all. But when they're not focused on grinding and it's just, here's a really really hard game kind of thing, and let's just say there's 12 levels, realistically, if you're really experienced with the game or the genre kind of thing, you could probably go in there and make it to like 9, 10, on your first run kind of thing, if you're really good at it. Whereas when you're not really good at it, you're probably only gonna make it to one or two, and then you're
Yeah.
going to get some persistence and everything that is going to help you make it easier on yourself and get farther into it by better gear, better weapons, whatever it is, items,
Mm-hmm.
power-ups, stat boost, whatever it is. And in a way, the persistence is in a way accessibility, in the terms
Mm-hmm.
of helping players with less skill be able to make it farther through their game.
Yeah. And persistence is definitely a major aspect of when we talk about like the modern roguelike, the one that most mainstream audiences are more well aware of. And that leads into more of the whole roguelike versus roguelite aspect. But we'll talk about that one in a few minutes.
Another thing I
The
thought of is on the persistence.
Mhm,
Another thing it kind of acts as is it acts as almost dynamic difficulty
mhm,
in a way.
yeah. And that's a major point about the use of persistence when the game is balanced either correctly or incorrectly. And we've played, and for those of you who've been watching the streams, you know we've played plenty of roguelikes and lights where the persistence is so overtuned that you literally can't make progress on your like first 5 to 10 runs because the stats are just simply against you. But then we have games where if you're good, you can do a lot with very little, and then those extra boosts will push you even further, such as with Undermine and Hades, where, I've gotten to the point in Hades that I don't need anywhere near the best perks and the best unlocks, and I can make a really solid run through it. The same goes for Undermine, that I beat the main story, and I think it was like maybe less than 10 actual runs, just because I played the game so many times that I knew what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with kind of the growing changes of the rogue genre, that again, outside of the Mystery Dungeon series, the mainstream really didn't know or do too much in terms of traditional roguelikes. And I mean, again, NetHack is considered to be one of the top examples. It is like one of the oldest examples, and it's still being supported today. But I still don't think most mainstream audiences know what NetHack is.
I don't know what it is, but
What is a
here,
NetHack?
yeah, what is a net hack? What is a rogue?
Mm-hmm. But were you about to say something else on that?
No.
Okay. But when we look at kind of the history of the genre, and when it started to push towards the mainstream, one of the best examples would be Dungeons of Dreadmore. This was the opening game by Gaslamp Games. And this was released, I believe it was 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. And what this game did was it brought a sense of aesthetics to the genre. It was focused more on humor as well as being challenging, but also had accommodations in terms of difficulty settings, different perks, different things like that. So there was this idea that you could kind of have it both ways. You could make a very challenging. It's 2011. You can make a very challenging roguelike, but you can at least start giving new players a leg up. And I think this is what kind of began this idea of why does a roguelike need to be very archaic or very set in its ways to try and, can we make that more appealing to a larger audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I think about FTL, I've never cared for the graphical aesthetics of FTL.
Hmm.
They were good enough to be serviceable, but that was it.
Hmm.
I feel like they met the very minimum bar for me, and had it been much lower, I probably wouldn't have tried the game out, to be honest.
Hmm.
But I dearly love that game. I have played it so many times. I have gotten to where, like, if I'm playing it on easy mode, I can win probably, like, I think like some like 80-90% of the time on my
Hmm.
runs. But when I'm playing like normal, I can win probably about, I don't know, 50% of the time. Although when I
Hmm.
put the extended content in there with the flak and all that stuff, probably brings that down to more like 40 or 35 or something like that. Never tried it on hard though, but like still it's a very challenging game, and there is runs where there is no chance you have to win, none whatsoever. But those are fairly few and far between. Now there's certainly runs that a certain individual there's no way they could win, kind of thing. Like where I got the 50% win rate on normal kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
I know I used to watch a streamer who could win probably like 90%, 95% of every run on normal,
Hmm.
and I was like, dang.
Yep, and that is a major point about the proc gen or just the learning or the gameplay loop of roguelikes, lights, whatever. That while a lot of it is about, what you get in a run, the primary factor of success or what should be success is the player's own skill at the game. That again, give a master player just basic weapons, basic luck, they can probably still either beat the game or get really damn close. Give them really great stuff, and they'll just utterly break the game. We've seen
Mm-hmm.
this in my Biome Isaac plays, in Hades, and even stuff like deck builders, like Slay the Spire Monster Train. That if you're really good at the game and you get the best stuff, nothing's really going to stop you. And that is part of the joy of playing the roguelike genre. This idea that, well, anything can happen. That is why, proc gen or procedural generation has become such a major point of it. That if you have 100 runs of a roguelike, you should get 100 different experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, then something's gone wrong.
Yeah, and I feel like something went wrong when we're talking about Dead Cells kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
I really enjoyed that game at first. Like it was really fun. I really enjoyed it, and I never got good at it. I was got better. I was able to beat the first map, go on to the second map, all the second maps. There's like what, three different second maps,
There's like a there's so many of them,
but
and they've
like
added more.
you know the thing is though is like I played through that first one so many times, and like yeah, the map layouts are changing, where the enemy spawns are changing, but like the whole feel of everything doesn't change, and like it feels like I feel like they could have not changed the map layout and not changed the enemy layout, and it would have been pretty much the exact same as what I got. So like it got kind of stale to a point, and I feel like that's where it kind of lacked kind of thing, and that's what in the end made me quit kind of thing. I did make it to the third maps a few times kind of thing, a few of them. I don't know which ones. It's been a while since then, but I know I made to the third map a few times. But
Yeah.
it just burned me out, and just like the item collection and getting all that stuff was just very very grindy, and I was having to do that same thing so many times,
Hmm.
and it felt like I just wasn't really getting anywhere, like
Hmm.
like like I was at the limits of my skills kind of thing, and got about as good as I was going to get kind of thing, without memorization kind of thing. And yeah, it was just kind of a dead end for me. And it's like I can keep on grinding and unlock stuff, and maybe I'll get something, and maybe I'll get enough stuff to help me farther, by getting more healing, getting better starting gear, such, but like I didn't want to keep on grinding for over and over and over again on something I was already really tired of. So
Yeah.
like that's where the game lost me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is another, I think, issue that we saw with when the genre began to again splinter out towards the rogue action roguelikes, roguelites, and so on. That there is a very big difference between good and bad procedural generation. And Proc Gen in of itself, that is another episode waiting to happen. Like it's way too big for us to explore here. But the problem that a lot of games face is that if the beginning of a roguelike is just, copy pasted 10,000 times, and there's not enough to break up that beginning monotony, it's hard, I think, to motivate someone to keep playing. And that's, again, where a lot of the traditional roguelikes start. That you begin with, one sword and maybe one piece of food. Hopefully you'll find something better in the next 10 minutes. It's the same thing if you remember when I played Assurin the Wanderer. That it very much falls into that same play. Now, of course, Sharon has persistence, but if you don't have those items, you're still replaying things. Whereas with something like Slay the Spire, FTL, and so on, that probably within the first 10 minutes, maybe even the first 5 minutes of starting a new run, the paths begin to diverge. Your very first pickup, your very first, item unlock, that, sends you down a completely different path.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Dead Cells, and with a lot of the other games, it kind of felt like, okay, I get a new sword, I'm still swinging the sword. What is really changing in my run? Maybe I do a little bit more damage. Maybe I'm going to be a fire spec. But the same basic strategy doesn't change.
Yeah, I'm going to go up and hit things with my sword.
Yeah. With FTL, getting focusing on missiles is a different strategy than focusing on lasers, which is different than, doing crew transports and mind control and drones.
And just regular guns. I mean, you can spam some regular guns and just do massive damage. Like one of my strategies was get the if I could get the right pulls, is just get the one energy based weapon. I think it was one energy cost. There was one that was also like it. There was two energies kind of thing, and I think it was like 2 shots. Both shots do 1 damage kind of thing. And like if you had like 4 of those, you could shred through an entire shield with 2, max shields with the first 2, and then like knock out 2 rooms with the other 2 in your first thing. So your first thing, you could shred through their shields, then hit their shield room twice, if not 4 times, to completely disarm their shields, kind of thing. So they have to repair, or hit their weapons twice, hit their shields twice, and that's just your 4 basic guns, kind of thing. Like, of course, there's other strategies where you have the the laser, and you can just plow through a lot of things, and that's honestly my favorite thing. But like, there's just so many ways you can build it, and every way is different, and you have to kind of almost guess at what the RNG is going to give you, kind of thing. And you can do all these combos in between. Like you could do like like if I could get a couple of those things and get a laser on top of that, ooh man, just shred the shield and then just laser the heck out of everything.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for the Binding of Isaac. And the Binding of Isaac and Spelunky are probably what we'll be focusing more on in the next few minutes, because that's when we began to see the real mainstream break of the roguelike genre.
But I think another thing that sunk Dead Cells was the fact that the levels were so long. Because like, man, if you were not doing a speed run, if you were going through and legitimately exploring and trying to get everything, it would take you 15, 20 minutes to clear one of those levels. If not longer.
And length and pacing of roguelikes is a very difficult thing to balance. Because the longer you make an individual run, the more weight that you attach to it. It's why games like the Bind of Isaac, Slay the Spire, Monster Train, Hades, that most of their runs are between 30 minutes to an hour, give or take. Probably even you could. I've seen people like speed run Hades in like 20 minutes. Once they really know what they're doing, they get lucky. But when we see roguelikes and even traditional rogues that are approaching, 4 hours, 6 hours, and stuff like that, it becomes, I think, far less moving to restart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
when it's too long, you don't want to go back.
mm-hmm. And the kind of breaking of the game, it's a very interesting idea. Like, in a lot of traditional roguelikes, you can certainly get really good combinations of items and gear and then just destroy the game. But it really wasn't until, again, like this more mainstream approach that it became more of an option for a wider audience. And that, I think, is a good segue into talking about Binding of Isaac and Spelunky. And this is when we get into the quote-unquote action roguelike portion of our talk here. Because when we look at roguelikes, and again, the traditional roguelike being turn-based WeGo, the rise of the action roguelike is really where this divide began to happen. That suddenly it wasn't turn-based. Binding of Isaac and Spelunky are not turn-based games. Maybe they're visual novels. What do you think?
I thought they were first-person shooters.
Yeah, well, Isaac, you shoot tears, so it's a first-person shooter. But with these games, suddenly you had a game built on proc gen. It was meant to be replayed, but it was not turn-based. Not in the slightest. And this is when the market really began to shift. That suddenly we could put roguelike elements into other games. So here's my question for you, because this is such a very muddy answer. When you hear roguelikes or roguelike elements, what comes into your mind when you hear about that in a game?
You mean like what is it going to have in
Yeah,
it?
like if someone says, this is a roguelike shooter, or a roguelike platformer, or a roguelike RPG. Like when you hear the roguelike part, what do you associate that to?
Well, procedural generation in many different ways.
Hmm.
Levels, uh, items, equipment, uh, layouts of levels. Because like when I said levels and layouts of levels, the thing I'm talking about there is the difference is one is how the procedural lays things out, the level design, and the other one is sometimes you might start up in the ice biome, sometimes you might start up in the fire biome, sometimes you might start up in the plant biome, etc. kind of thing. Just like so it's not just layouts kind of thing that are procedural. And the other thing I think about is you know enemies being procedural as of the way they're placed, as well as if it's the like and or the light,
Hmm.
then procedural elements.
Hmm. Yep. And you hope to be a rogue one day, Foreign? All right, go for it. And the it, again, like what you described there, definitely hits a lot of the notes. This idea that the game is going to be meant to be replayed. That is, I think, one of the most important aspects. And the replay factor of a roguelike needs to be on point because, again, rogues are not the same as a traditional or a linear game. And that also will be a major point when we start talking about roguelites, probably in the next point about this. That In a traditional game, it could be an 8 to 20 hour experience, could be 5 hours, it could be 100 hours. But when you're done with that, you shelve the game, you're not going to replay the game right then and there. With a roguelike, you're going to have an hour, maybe less run, but you're going to replay that probably 50, 100, 1,000 times. Again, there are people who have thousands of hours in the Binding of Isaac. I'm sure there's people who are reaching that point. Sorry, a bug was flying around me. Reaching that point in FTL as well. That the game is so replayable and there's so much variance in those runs that you can just, yes, you've been in the game, but have you been, this run of the game or this run?
Yeah. I only have 84 hours in FTL, sadly. I don't think it's tracking my hours right, but I could have swore I had more than that. But I could have swore I had like 140 or something. But here's a sort of off topic, but not quite off topic. What do you think about, and we haven't seen much of this, if we've even seen it all. What do you think about a game that is another genre first, and then they add rogue elements, kind of thing, like the persistence, the random gen kind of thing? Like just, not trying to, make it where, they still have longer playthroughs kind of thing than your rogues, but they're not trying to get you to do as many of them. They're trying to definitely more focus on normal progression with a side of rogue progression kind of thing.
That is very tricky because we've seen games kind of experiment with like a rogue-ish style bonus mode or a system like that. There's been RPGs that have had randomized dungeons, one dungeon out of all the other ones in the game that is randomized. And the problem I think with this is that for a roguelike to work, or at least the better ones to work, the game has to be really designed from the start to accommodate this. Over like the last 4 or 5 years, we've been seeing, again, this kind of leads into this trend of the growing market of more developers adding in roguelike modes with it. And hopefully I don't butcher this too badly, to Citizen with the cool numbers in the name. Yeah, this idea of procedural generation, resource management, working with what you have, those are major points. But when we look at kind of the splintering of it and trying to integrate into other genres, it becomes its own very unique beast. And I think what you said there about kind of, is it a roguelike first, or is it the major genre first, is a big point about this. Like, the idea of a shmup roguelike. Games like Monolith, I always forget the other one, the one with Cthulhu in it. But these are games that are very much a shmup first, but also have those rogue elements.
Yeah,
Whereas,
that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. But then there are, one second, allergies are just starting to kill me here. But then there are games that try to be a roguelike first, but then throw the shmup side in second. And those games typically feel less interesting because proc gen for the sake of proc gen doesn't save a game. And that is a very important point about this, because here's an example of a game that tried to do just that. Who here has played A Valley Without Wind by Arkham Games?
I do feel like they're, like, I feel like the beat 'em up genre is one that could, benefit from rogue elements kind of thing. You know, not to be confused with the, you know, the rogue mode for Street Fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, like I know that in like what was it, River City Girls? I
Mm-hmm.
really loved the way their maps were laid out, kind of thing. What if you had a procedural version of that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would just add so much to that game, you know, especially if you added stuff into the game, like procedural elements that would, you know, carry over.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really cool, especially if you then took you know, and made a better combat system, made the game better overall as a beat 'em up. I think that
Mm-hmm.
could go pretty far,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I mean, beat 'em ups in general are pretty short games. So are side scrolling shooters and whatnot, top down shooters, and I
Mm-hmm.
think those short genres are the ones that are, I think, most compatible with rogue like elements.
Yep, and that has been a very big point about, again, this splintering of the term. That genres that are known for being relatively short gameplay loops, or very short sessions, really apply themselves well to roguelike elements. Because if your game is only 20 or 30 minutes long, you can add elements to that to mix things up on each run. The same thing with, again, shmup and roguelike. That with Monolith. Or with, again, the name, I'm going to keep bothering me until I remember the name of it. But when you add these elements to a shorter play style, again, the joy of a roguelike is, yes, it's only 30 minutes to an hour long, but times that by every possible variance, and it's why people who really get into a solid roguelike can play them for hundreds of hours.
Yeah, and your average side scrolling or top down scrolling shooters, what, about an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah, maybe even
So
less than that if you know what you're doing.
yeah, but I mean like standard playtime, you know,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's too long to add the rogue like elements to it. And like the same thing goes for the beat 'em up. I mean, the average beat 'em up is what, like hour 10 to like 2 hours.
Yeah,
You know, I think it's
normal.
right there, and it's longer than a rogue is, but I don't think it's so long that adding rogue-like elements, as long as you don't make them grindy, will detract from it. I think it'll add more to it. As long
Yeah.
as, you know, and most people don't beat them up or a side-scrolling shooter on their first go anyway. So
Hmm.
adding that procedural bit to it can give the player a new experience when they're going through a second time. And I
Yep.
think that would be beneficial.
Or a 50th time.
Yeah.
And to bring this back to a Valley Without Wind, what a Valley Without Wind did is that they try to procedurally generate everything. You know, every level, every room was procedurally generated. You had no idea what was ever going to show up in it, and it was just complete chaos. And the problem is that complete chaos makes for a very confusing experience. I'm sure there are people who love A Valley Without Wind 1, but the problem is that if you don't have some semblance of structure, the entire thing breaks down. And this is something that a lot of roguelike developers have spoken about. A lot of people, I think, from the outside, think of a roguelike as in I saw a run, I find the sword of ultimate power, run is over. That's my entire run. Or the run is I start, I pick up an item, I immediately get poisoned, run die, runs over, I fail. What you want, or what is seen in roguelikes, is there has to be some kind of structure to how these levels are laid out. You can break or adjust the structure in, very small or very specific ways. But the idea is that over the course from beginning to end of a roguelike or roguelite experience, there has to be, the man behind the curtain guiding it all. And that's where your algorithm comes in. If it's just, anything and everything can happen, it doesn't make for as quality of an experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that leaving things just random is a recipe for disaster. You
Mm-hmm.
need procedural in there rather than random, which is the
Mm-hmm.
difference between random generation and procedural generation.
Yep.
And procedural puts limitations on the random generation so that
Mm-hmm.
you don't, I don't know, find a refrigerator in somebody's, bathroom, because why would a refrigerator be in somebody's bathroom?
Or a house has 47 bathrooms and one bedroom.
No bedrooms, just 47 bathrooms
Well, I
and a
mean, a
kitchen.
bathtub could be a bed. You can adapt.
Yeah, you sleeping in the bathtub is always a good idea, right? That's what
Mhm.
the Health and Safety Commission say, right? They
Yeah.
just say take a sleep in the bathtub, don't worry about drowning. You won't have to worry about it in the morning.
And to Citizen's comment about if it's too short, that there isn't enough room for variety, that is another very big point. That if it's too short of a gameplay loop, there's not enough elements, it doesn't really hit that point of variance. The game Gloom is a good example of this. Gloom is for me, it's a very underrated gem of an action roguelike. But the problem with it is that the runs are like 12 to 15 minutes long. And you would think that, 12 to 15-minute long runs would be, very replayable. But the problem is that there's just not enough there to give it that sense of replayability. That there are specific weapons and perks in Gloom that you're going to need to win, or they'll make life easier for you. So there's just not enough of that same thing that we saw with the Binding of Isaac or with FTL, where, I pick up an item, I can adapt, I can roll with those punches. With a game like Gloom, it's basically, did I get X, Y, and Z? No? Then most likely I'm going to fail if I try to do some of the advanced stuff in it.
Here's a
Or
question
even
for
just
you.
make it to it.
On Gloom, was it the fact that the playtime was short, or was it the fact of a lack of variance, or
Mm,
both?
it's kind of both. That there's a lot of items in Gloom, but you were in such a very compacted area. I think there's, let me see, one, two, three. I think there's 3 or 4 biomes total, and you can only get maybe 1 to 2 items per biome. So you really don't have the space. Like in FTL, for instance, you can spend a whole lot of time going to shops, getting extra scrap, and trying to make those builds work. In a
Mm-hmm.
game like Gloom, it's such a short experience, you are just pushed, to the end whether you like it or not.
Mm.
Yeah,
So there's
and
no
my
like taking your time exploring and
no,
trying to get something
definitely
better.
no. No, everything is laid out on a very linear track. So you really don't have that opportunity.
So maybe it's the linearity
Hmm.
and the rather than the length.
Yeah. And to Foreign's comment about like Binding of Isaac, again, it's one of the reasons why I mentioned it so heavily in the roguelike book and why it gets brought up in these discussions. That when we talk about kind of the quintessential action roguelike, the Binding of Isaac and maybe to a lesser extent Enter the Gungeon would probably be number one and number two on that list. Because the Binding of Isaac, it really drives home just how much, the right, putting your finger down on like those certain scales of what's going to be affected by the proc gen can just really influence the game. And I think this is what goes back to one of the reasons why you liked FTL so much. That a lot of the procedural generation of FTL, and to the same extent, Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon, is on what do you do during a run. Whether you get a really good item, a really good part or drone in FTL, or whatever. It's this idea that
you can adapt.
Yeah, you don't know what your build's going to be. I don't know what I'm going to get in the Binding of Isaac. I don't know what I'm going to get in FTL. But I do know one thing. If I'm going to win, I have to adapt to it. Whereas with a lot of the lesser action roguelikes and roguelites, it basically comes down to, did I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on my checklist? Yes, I'm going to win. Did I get 1, 2, 3, and 6? No? Then, I'm not going to be able to win that. And this is why you need to have not only enough items to create variants, but there needs to be enough viability to them as well. That if you give me an item that literally the final boss is immune to, that's a dead item. Why should I ever take that item if I know that when I get to the end, it's just going to be a wasted space in my inventory?
Yeah. And that's the adaptability, I think, is very important because, like, FTL, when you get to the final boss, there is no one strategy that wins. You have to adapt based off of whatever you get, kind of thing. And like, you could have a all guns way, and you could win that way, but there's the you could also have a bunch of lasers. You could have one really powerful laser and couple missiles. You could have a powerful laser and or middle laser and a few guns, kind of thing. But every way you're able to adapt, with the everything's able to hit the shields except for the missile, so you can whittle those down. But then you could just take the missile and bypass the shields and hit the shield generator, kind of thing. And you have to get the shields down to be able to beat them, and then you have to be able to take down other parts of him so he does take you down, kind of thing. And combat in general is all the same throughout it, but more extreme on the final boss. But like, there's you could also teleport in. There's all kinds of different things, but each thing has their own viability, and they all work together as long as you can adapt and build things together.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a very interesting point, because and this is something I talked about in the book, that when you're trying to define or balance items, you're trying to give the player outs, or you're trying to give them a solution. It shouldn't be like, it's a difference between, say, I'm going to give this character fire damage, and let's say we have enemies immune to fire damage. Well, that entire build is wrong, or it's not going to work. But let's say we have builds that are designed around, let's say, direct damage, or damage over time, or, reflect damage, or, thorn builds. All those builds are doing damage, but they're doing they're doing it in different ways. The goal is still the same. I need to, this boss has 500 points of health. I need to do 500 points of damage. But how I get to that in each run is going to be demonstrably different.
I think a fire immunity in almost every game, or any kind of element, immunity, is almost always a wrong choice to put in the game. Yeah. Like resistance, yes, like they're resistant to fire, so they take less damage from it. But almost never should you make them completely immune. The only games I can think of that complete immunity to an element that would be acceptable would be an RPG, because like you're supposed to think, and you have like you have a black mage here that can do all the elements kind of thing. So it's
Hmm.
like, well, I shouldn't use fire. Let's use one of the others. Kind of thing. Instead of because you have direct choices there at all points because that's a game are built around choices and strategy rather than
Hmm.
specific builds kind of thing that you can't just freely change on a whim. Kind of thing. And
Yeah.
when you can't freely change things on a whim, making something completely resistant to something is a huge red flag.
Yeah, like in Library of Ruina, they do have bosses that just say, these five things you've been using this whole time. Yeah, we're immune to that. But it's also a game where you can completely rebuild your deck before every boss fight. So it's more about that strategy and planning as opposed to just, throwing a whammy at your player base and saying, hey, you really like using ice damage for the last 20 hours? You can't use it anymore. Hope you didn't build your entire strategy around that.
hmm you
And
need the ice fire build.
or fiery ice.
Yeah.
That could be DLC. And I think again, like this kind of gets at the hallmark of what makes a good roguelite, or any of the splits that we talk about. There has to be variance and viability. That whatever I find doing a run, I should be able to make that work to some extent. Obviously they're going to be built better or worse than anything, but you want to avoid having the one dud. That one item that you take it just kills your entire run kind of thing. And like the Biome Ice, like again, it's such a weird case here because there's over 600 items in that game now, and there are probably tier lists on top of tier lists in terms of what people consider to be the best items and what you can do in that. And I'm sure there are plenty of items that are at the very bottom of those lists. And I know Edmund wanted people just to take everything and anything that they find, but
Then you should have
it's
made it automatic.
yeah, but it is a very hard point when if you know that item C is a horrible item that you should not take, you know, how do you square that circle? Do you try and rebalance that item? Do you, weaken other items? Which mostly you don't. You never want to weaken other choices to make another choice stand out. And it is very difficult, and why a lot of the more advanced examples of these games are very complicated in terms of their balancing.
Yeah, I find that balancing wise, I think the best way to balance it is side grades
Hmm.
because you know when you do things that are numerically better or worse kind of thing, you generally get like this offsetting of balance. But when you have a whole bunch of side grades kind of thing, then
Hmm.
you have this everything's sort of uniform in power, but everything is also really useful kind of thing. Of course,
Yeah.
I would put some variance in there of a little bit higher and a little bit lower kind of thing, but I wouldn't probably stray too far up or down kind of thing. I would mainly
Hmm.
focus on sideways.
Yeah. And side grades, for those of you watching who don't know what we're discussing, these are items that will oftentimes have a benefit, but at the same time will have some kind of downside to them. That it's not just, here's an item that gives you 50 attack, 100 points of health, and makes you immune to all damage. It could be, here's an item that lets you do 20 more points of range damage, but now all your melee damage is now 30 points weaker.
Yeah,
That you're trading a benefit. Yeah, exactly, Foreign. You're trading a benefit for a disadvantage. But again, let's say you're building an entirely range build. Who the hell cares if my sword does 15 points less of damage? I'm using a, assault rifle for the next hour.
yeah. I know that FTL does a lot of this. Where
Hmm.
like you can get this gun that shoots and does 2 damage, and it takes 13 seconds to charge.
Hmm.
Where there's another weapon that shoots and does 1 damage, kind of thing, but it only takes 9 seconds, or I think
Hmm.
7 seconds, something like that.
Yep.
And there's another weapon that shoots two singular shots, kind of thing, and and you can, or maybe it's three, and you can charge it for as long as you want, up to the three max. And I think the max, I think it's like 7 seconds per charge or something. And with that, they all of them have roughly the same DPS. There's a little bit higher and a little bit lower kind of thing in there, but there's so many different more strategies kind of thing, because like when you have the single shot kind of thing, this is something you would just train on a target and just keep it down kind of thing. And you have the 2 damage kind of thing. This is great for taking stuff down and specifically cracking through shields. And then you have the charge one, which would be even better at cracking down a shield, but since it's has a lower DPS kind of thing, it's less effective later on kind of thing,
Yeah.
after you get the shield cracked. So like everything has it's all side grades. They're all kind of in that same DPS bracket. At the same time, they're all very, very different in how you can use them for your strategy. They're all side grades.
Hmm. Yeah, and you want to have this, and back to what Foreign said a minute ago, that you never want something to be your answer be, why the hell should I ever take this? Like, in what world would this item ever be useful? What you want is to say, okay, this item doesn't work for my build. But let's say, for instance, I get another item that synergizes with it. Suddenly we have this kind of build up going. And there are cases where, under the right circumstances, quote unquote bad choices can be game breaking. Like if let's say you have a weapon that every time you swing your sword, it costs you 2 points of health. Okay, why would I ever want to use a weapon that's going to kill me? But let's say I get an item that any damage done to me that's less than 5 is negated. Well, guess what? 2 damage becomes 0. So now this weapon that is probably even more powerful, I've completely negated its downside.
And then maybe
But
you have another item that says every time you take damage, you get some kind of buff, or
yeah.
something. And to
So
four, and the reason why to take the 1 damage one is not because it's inefficient, but because it's efficient, because they only costed 1 energy to actually power up rather than 2
mhm,
energy on the others.
yeah. So suddenly what we have here is this kind of, the island of misfit toys. That individually these choices are horrible. They're not going to work for you. But when you start combining them, suddenly you could have something very game breaking. And we get into kind of like those like Yu-Gi-Oh turnaround plays that we saw on the show, and they just like invent some crazy rule and they break the game.
Oh, just I'm going to attack the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the strategy for FTL is I'm just going to attack the moon.
Hmm. Let's see. We're about 55 minutes in. I figure, what do you think? Maybe another 15 to 20 minutes? Maybe a little bit more than that?
We could go that long,
Yeah, we'll see how this
but
goes. But
are we going to hit on uh, the elephant
deck
in the
building?
room, the
You-
deck builders?
I think we can touch on it. I do want to. I think the final section for for the series or for each episode should be, I think, talking about what this means for the greater market, because I think that's kind of where we've been aiming at. But the kind of like when we talk about the evolution and where we kind of seen all these elements that we've been discussing over the last hour come together are the deck builders. And if you really want to drive a traditional, I think, roguelike fan a little crazy, mention deck building roguelikes to them.
Mhm.
Because that just completely breaks it just completely breaks the whole terminology. Because this is, again, where we start. Oh, I almost forgot. We didn't talk about roguelike and roguelite differences. So we may get to
Well, we
that one
did.
next. A little bit. I guess just to clarify it, that roguelite has persistence between runs. As in, what you do on run A will provide you with resources and elements for run B. If you just simply unlock elements, new things that show up from run to run, that is not a roguelite. Yeah, exactly. Foreign, I think, summed it up really well. That if the persistence is at that point where you can just break the game, that's a roguelite, and it also means that the game is over. While roguelikes are built on the inherent variance of each run, giving it intent or amazing replayability.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the point that deck building roguelikes, and then there's also deck building roguelites, just to really, confuse everybody. It's this idea again, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about combining genres. That a deck builder or a CCG is another very big genre that's benefited from roguelike elements. Because,
Well, I mean, CCG is a very, very different
yeah.
because CCGs are, focused on collecting cards and
Mhm.
multiplayer and all that.
Yeah. But the idea of playing a hand of cards, an individual play of Slay the Spire, Monster Train, any deck builder, what is that? A minute? 2 minutes of play? Maybe at most 3 to 4. But again, put the roguelike elements on the right aspects, and you can just keep on adding replayability to it.
Mm. And when you look at deck builders, there's just so much stuff you can do. Slay the Spire, Monster Train. What are some other examples?
Ball of the Void, Banners of Ruin. Um, so again, there's over 50 deck building roguelikes on Steam right now. I've played, I think, 45 of them.
There's probably a lot more than 50.
Probably. But yeah, again, the deck building roguelike, much like action roguelikes and the games we've talked about before, they're not about complete chaos. Most of their plays have a very straightforward path from beginning to end. Slay the Spire, it's literally, 3 branching trees worth of choices, you beat the game. Where
Mm-hmm.
they focus the procedural generation and, again, the variance on is what do you get during those runs? And again, this is where kind of the deck building aspect really synergizes with roguelikes. Because they have fixed cards, but you never know what cards you're going to get in a run. So suddenly, again, you have to build a strategy out of whatever the hell that drops. And the added benefit, and this is something we talked about before in terms of this idea of, player control generation or player guided decision, or however we want to define it, is that the player decides what cards they get. Yes, it's from a pool of, a choice of 2 or 3, but I have a little bit more control over what is going to happen during a run.
Yeah, and I think player having the choice, player agency is
Mm-hmm.
a key to these games really working well, I think, because like if you can't adapt to anything, then it's just a linear game. Linear with random, it's linear randomness, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, rather than, or linear proceduralness, rather than, actually having, you're railroaded into whether you can win or lose based off of
Mm-hmm.
what
Again, if
RNG
I
Jesus,
don't,
RNGesus gives you, kind of thing.
yep, if there's 50 items and let's say one item is the only thing the boss is immune to, I have a 1 in 50 chance of winning my play. And that's not interesting. You want to lose 49 times and get that, one lucky win?
Yeah, it's you know, and the other thing, like I like comparing, Slay the Spire and Monster Train because those are two very
Mm-hmm.
similar games. And I really enjoyed Slay the Spire at first, but I got to the end like three three times, and like every time I got to the end, the boss was perfectly built to crush my strategy that I was built in.
Mm-hmm.
One build I built around armor, so then I had an enemy that is like I think it was like all armor is null. And I was like, well, my entire strategy is null. And then it's like, I built another one that's built off of powers kind of thing. And it's like every time you play a power, the boss gets supercharged. And I'm like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, and another thing. And after it happened like three times, I was like, no, I'm done with this game. I quit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I was really enjoying it first, but I grew to really dislike it in the end. And
Mm-hmm.
then you go to Monster Train, and Monster Train was I think is the basically the way I think about Monster Train is Slay the Spire but better. It's got all the good things from Slay the Spire and none of the bad things, kind of thing. Like it tells you who the final boss is going to be at the beginning, what they're going to be immune to, so definitely do not do a build that's going to be weak to that. Do any other
Mm-hmm.
build but that build. Like they're going to power up every time you play a power card. So then just do not build a strategy around power cards. Matter of fact, your strategy might be building a thing avoiding power cards completely kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
like it just and you knew that every section you were going to get a certain amount of things, and you knew that there was going to be an enemy at the end. And you
Mm-hmm.
could also scroll down and look and see, oh, well, next time I'm going to be able to remove cards from my deck. Next, or like it's not going to be for like three more turns. So or three more sections. So should I go ahead and pay this extra to remove this now? Yes, no,
Mm-hmm.
make my decision kind of thing. And you're able to plan it out, and
Yeah.
it's not so much blind thing, and you only get to pick one or two sides kind of thing. So you get to pick whether you want this or these kind of thing. So but like
Mm-hmm.
if you really need X and you see X on the next thing, you're probably going to go on that side.
Mm-hmm.
No matter even if the other side has two good things, this is the thing you really need right now. So you're
Yeah.
going to go for that. And it was really focused on giving you the player agency.
Yeah.
Your choices matter to an extreme degree, and more than you could ever dream about getting to mean anything in Slay the Spire, because you never knew what was coming. You never
Mm-hmm.
had any way to plan. There was no strategy other than I'm going to build a real good deck and just hope and pray that I don't go completely fucked over by RNG off of this really
Yeah.
good deck I built. That's all you could do. You build a really good deck and you hope and pray. We're
Mm-hmm.
split in Monster Train. You knew, in general what was coming. You didn't know exactly what was coming, but you knew in general what was coming. You had time to prepare for it. You planned, you plotted out, and you really used your player skill, your player agency to do the best you could. And if you failed at the end, you felt like you lost because you were not good enough, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where in Slay the Spire, oftentimes you lose and you feel like you lost because RNG didn't like you.
Yeah.
You know.
And what you said about having to decide between like different cards, that again gets back to the importance of choice in these games. That you want to avoid just flat out, better options. Do I take a weapon that does 1 point of damage and costs me 3 mana, or do I take a weapon that does 20 points of damage but costs me, 2 points of mana? You
That
know,
sounds like Hearthstone.
yeah. What you want again is the idea of yes, this card or this option is better or it has higher stats. But if let's say I'm building a discard strategy and this character gains, 5 power every time I discard a card from my hand, well, this guy is going to be far more better for me right now. And that's what you want. You want options that they work, in their perfect times, as opposed to just always being good or always being bad.
Mm-hmm. And it's all about the side grades, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, the other thing about Monster Train is with their procedural generation and everything. When they gave you cards, they gave you cards that the procedural generation thought would be the most useful to you. Like if the game sees you're building a deck around burn damage kind of thing, then more than likely one or two of the cards are going to have something related to burn, or
Yeah.
or something off branching from that they might tempt you with to kind of variate your build kind of thing. And it's monitoring your character powers, it's monitoring your deck and what cards in that, and it's using that to make the
Mm-hmm.
procedural generation give you good choices kind of thing. It's not
And
trying to make you, it's not trying to give you bad choices. And like we see this in Streets of Rage when we get two things, and it's like I don't want either one of those. Why would we
yeah.
want either one of those kind of thing? And then sometimes it gives us a bunch of amazing things. It's like I want all these things,
Mm-hmm.
where and it's just random the way it does it. The way Monster Train does it, it's like here's two or three things that you probably want all of every time, kind of thing, and it makes that choice hard on the player to
Yeah.
like, oh, what way do I go? Like like
And
there's all different kinds of combinations. But then you think about it, well, my focus is this. I have this one card that does this.
mhm.
If I do this, if I get this particular card, then that will supercharge the heck out of my strategy. Where these other two will boost it, but this will supercharge it. I'm going with this. This is a clear winner, but it's not a clear winner outside of context in that one specific build that you've got going on, because like other specific builds that are very similar, that whatever could be supercharged kind of thing would be a different card with those same three cards in the same type of build kind of thing.
Yeah, and a part of the genius of that with monster training is that you choose your strategy based on whatever two factions that you take. So that allows them to have a little bit more control over, what cards you're going to see out of it. And it really does come down to, again, all these different choices that are all trying to solve the same problem. How do I kill the boss? How do I inflict enough damage? And if you can solve that problem, or solve that equation with, any number of potential strategies, then you're good. Yes, again, and I think, as we've said, there will always be in these kinds of games choices and builds that are just flat out amazing. You get this, your chance of winning goes up to, let's say, 70 to 80%. But you don't want anything to have a zero or negative impact on your overall strategy. You don't want dead options. And when we say a dead option, we mean that you take this, it will never serve a purpose in any run or in any build of your game.
Yeah, I still remember one of my favorite runs from Monster Train. Like, I was going through and RNG was not being kind to me. It seemed
Mm-hmm.
like I kept on getting these little, what was those little guys? The little worthless?
The little imps.
Yeah, the imps. Yeah, I kept on getting imps. And like, I was like, I don't want imps, give me something else. And I was like, I'll take it, this is all, I gotta have some kind of creature, And I kept on getting those, and then I got the God of Imps, which basically said for every imp on the field, he was like one cheaper or something, or powered up or something. I can't remember now.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, okay, this is coming around. I can actually get this really OP guy out there for really cheap, if not free, you know. And then I
Mhm.
got, cards that just summoned more imps kind of thing. And then I got, and then I forget what it was, but I got something that I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of spell, a damage spell, and it did more damage, I think, based off of how many imps I had on the field. And it was like, like, yeah, I have this really OP guy that's got like, I think like, 30 or 40 attack. But like now I have this spell that if I have like 10 imps out, kind of thing, this spell does like 150 damage and can like one shot anything but like the bosses,
Mhm.
and even the first ones of those it could one shot, and like and and then I was like, it's I think it was removed from game, and then so I quickly went and removed the remove from game, so I could keep on reusing it. And then I put the thing that every time I used it, it came back to my hand at the start of the turn. So like it was just turn, like every turn, just one shot anything, one shot everything, and it was overly broken, and it was
Yeah.
off of one of the worst possible builds I had turned into one of the best builds.
Yeah. And you want to have that potential, that you want to let players feel like they got one over on you when you get like those crazy options that come up.
Hmm.
But I think with
And
that, let's.
it's
You got
it's
anything?
thanks to their proceduralness that
Mhm.
those popped up, because like had it just been RNG kind of thing, like Slay the Spire, I would have probably never gotten that build, because
Mhm.
Slay the Spire would have never, be like, it would have suggested me, it would gave me the really OP guy and the really OP spell when I didn't have any imps, and it would have given me all the imps when I didn't have any of the other two, and like I could have never put together that build, but since the, procedural in Monster Train specifically goes, what do we think would be good for his build kind of thing, it gave me those options.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's the reason why I think that Monster Train in every way is a better Slay the Spire.
Yeah. But it certainly did not earn the same amount of sales and
Sadly
prestige.
not. And the
And
guy from Slay the Spire actually worked on Monster Train, so it's not like
mhm.
I'm crapping all over the guy to
Mhm.
embrace a different company. It's he worked on it too. He worked on both of them.
Mhm.
And that's part of the reason why it was a Baylor Slay the Spire, because in a lot of ways it was Slay the Spire too.
Mhm. And that is the segue into the final point I want to talk about for our episode this week. And that is, what does the market look like for roguelikes today? And this is going to be, I think, either very positive, very depressing, based on what genre we're covering each week. The roguelike genre as a whole, I think, and maybe, for the audience and for you, maybe you can share your opinion on this. But I think traditional roguelikes, in terms of the mainstream, not in terms of the niche or the fan base, I think those are very much going to be a dud in terms of trying to make a new one in that style right now.
If you're talking about sales, yes. I think the traditional roguelike is not going to be very profitable, if profitable at all.
It will,
Where
of course, have a fan base. Like, I'm not
yeah,
saying that. But in terms of, hitting something like the Binding of Isaac, FTL, Slay the Spire numbers, I just don't see it.
in terms of breaking even, it's far less likely. But it's also more likely at the same time, because it all depends. Because like it's less likely because you're not going to have as big as consumer base. It's
Mhm.
maybe more likely because it's so niche that people don't get very many of that, and the people who are hardcore for that will maybe dive all over your game. We see that with Avenger games where it's the same 20 people that buy every single, you know, Avenger
Hmm.
game that exists out there. Or maybe it's more than 20, but you get my point. There's not many of them, but
Hmm.
all of them buy every single Avenger game that comes out. Just like, I'm sure there's some people that buy every traditional Rogue that comes out.
Hmm.
But is that enough to break even? Well, it depends on how much you spent on your game. And, and how, if you actually do appeal to them, and if those people are actually aware of you. Because if you appeal to them and they're not aware of you, you lost. If they know about you but you don't appeal to them, then you lost too. They have to be aware that you exist. They have to, and whatnot. But you have to check off all these boxes. But it's a lot harder in many ways to succeed that way, rather than a more bigger, broader audience, which is what you would get with roguelites and deck builders and action roguelites, because those have a lot more big and broad consumer base.
Hmm.
I think right now the deck builder is probably the biggest of them, wouldn't you say? Right at the moment. It's always
Yeah.
shifting. Probably in
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, when somebody says, I'm going to build a deck builder, because I've seen What is a Rogue podcast,
Hmm.
by the time you release your game, deck builder may not be hot anymore. That may be deep in decline, and that's definitely the trouble with the game industry. One of the troubles with the game industry. But like, I right now, I think the deck builders are the hottest of them.
Yeah. And again, I think part of the problem is that when one of these examples becomes kind of the trendsetter, everybody tries to copy it. And even if your game legitimately does something different, it's still going to get compared to whatever is the top dog.
Hmm.
And again, we've asked this question many times. Why should I play your deck building roguelike when I still have Slay the Spire?
Because I'm all way better than Slay the Spire.
But how do you convey that to an audience who sees Slay the Spire with over 70,000 reviews on Steam and your game with maybe less than 1,000?
Well, one way is through art aesthetics,
Mm,
which
yeah.
is the reason why we've seen PUBG completely get dominated by Fortnite,
Mm, yeah.
because there was a vast difference in those graphical aesthetics. You had the Unity shop assets versus these custom Fortnite, 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 Fortnite assets. And then they were also different. They had the building and whatnot on top of that, and that's how they were able to you know trounce all over PUBG, is because they were more aesthetically pleasing, and they
Mhm.
were they were legitimately different. And you have you kind of need to be both.
Yeah.
And when Slay the Spire looks so good already, kind of hard to look much better than Slay the Spire.
Yep.
Which is, I think, one of the things that really hurt Monster Train, because I think Monster Train does legitimately look better than Slay the Spire, but it's not like PUBG, Fortnite differences. You know what I mean? It's more like a level of iteration rather than just a complete curb stopping when it comes to aesthetics. And it becomes so much harder to stand out by comparison. The better and more polished at that game that's setting the trend is.
And I think another very unique issue that roguelikes have compared to some of the other genres is that because roguelikes are meant to be replayed so many times, it's a lot harder to move off of one that you like.
Yeah.
Because again, like Binding of Isaac has, thousands of hours of gameplay in it at this point. Why should I play your version of the Binding of Isaac? It may still, you could do stuff legitimately better in it, but I still have all this other stuff to do in the Binding of Isaac. It's a game I already own. It's a game I already like. And it is, I think, getting harder and harder for these games to really stand out because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because for everyone that does break the mold, it becomes a new trendsetter. So it's why we say, like, when we talk about like action roguelikes, Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, and Hades are probably like the top three. And everything else for a lot of people doesn't really exist anymore for them.
Yep. Meaning that most of the time to have a reasonable chance at success, you got to be a trendsetter.
Mm-hmm. And to Citizens Common, yeah, like Hades, I think is probably going to be one of the new standards of like roguelike and roguelike design. It's also one of the few examples of it that uh, also integrate that into the story. That the story actually made sense in this roguelike world. Like, the only comparison I think would be something like Rogue Legacy, and their whole thing is you're cursed, so you keep coming back to life, or, it's your family. In Hades, the entire cast recognizes the fact that everybody's immortal. And they make light of the fact that, I beat you on this run, or I beat you on that run.
Yeah. Didn't we do a store page review for Jupiter Hell? Or was
I
that
don't think so.
we did a store page review on Jupiter something?
The Jupiter Moon's Tactics, I think.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, Jupiter Moon's Mecha.
Ah.
Yeah. But yeah, Jupiter Hell, we did play that one. And, again, like, it is very much in that style. Yeah, and like Hades is very weird in terms of whether or not it falls on roguelike or roguelite, because it does have a ton of persistence in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the future, excuse me, is really going to be seeing where else can people experiment with adding in roguelike elements. Because again, if you're just going to build another action roguelike or another deck building roguelike, people I think aren't going to resonate with it. My voice really is dying. Like Deathloop would be a really good example. Like Deathloop is very much a triple A roguelite. Probably more of a roguelite. And the same goes for Returnal as well. That AAA developers are finally starting to take notice of this trend. And
It only took them 40 years.
yeah, only. But it is going to present a very interesting challenge for developers in terms of if they can hit the levels of procedural generation variants, but with a AAA budget, how are you going to compete with that?
Yep, that's gonna be hard.
Hmm. And I think that there still is room. Again, like there are people who are going to buy every deck building roguelike. Just said they were going to buy every action roguelike, but trying to expand those audiences is going to be very difficult for the genre.
As there are people who will buy every FTL clone.
Or every adventure game.
Mm-hmm. Or every RPG.
Hmm. And once I'm closing my door while the phone's ringing.
I know Josh buys every platformer. Or platformer,
Hmm.
rather.
And every masochism simulator.
Yeah.
But I
Which
think
most
with
of which
that,
are platformers.
yeah. But speaking of that, that's a preview for our next episode. As episode 2 of our What Is a series is going to be talking about platformers. Another genre that I've never played any games with, right?
No, have you never played a platformer?
or roguelike.
No.
This has all just been me guessing at what the genre is this entire time.
Yep.
I
You've never played any of them. It's,
don't play video games here.
you never played a game in your life.
No. But let us wrap things up here. I think this was a really good discussion. And for those of you watching, if you have suggestions for a genre, or there's anything else you'd like us to talk about more in this, let us know in the comments below. Yep. And
Yeah.
again, like once you learn, like the beauty about roguelike design is that once you kind of figure out what's going on behind the scenes, you can just mess around in these games. And it's that joy of figuring out those crazy combinations that it's not the game telling you that A, B, and C is the ultimate build, it's you figuring it out of, experimentation and mastery, how to make these crazy runs pop.
Yeah. So I guess that's going to conclude our What is a Rogue
Mm-hmm.
podcast. And then next podcast, next Safely Stream podcast, we're going to be covering 2D platformers, 3D
Mm-hmm.
platformers, and physics platformers,
Mm-hmm.
or
All platform.
platformers as we refer to them as.
Yes. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to say there. So if you are new, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing. You will find links to all of our social medias down below.
Yeah. Join my Discord. You'll be able to, and Josh's Discord as well. But on my Discord in particular, you'll be able to play the game I'm working on once a month at our monthly dev chats. And what I'm working on is a grid-based CCG that
Mm-hmm.
is very, very unique. There's nothing like it. There are some things similar to it, like Triple Triad and Magic the Gathering. It's like if Triple Triad and Magic the Gathering had a baby, that would
Mm-hmm.
be my game, Neon Continuum. And
Yeah.
we, might be one of those trendsetters here soon. And hopefully. And so join the Discord, get to check that out. Come to my YouTube channel, go to Josh's YouTube channel, whichever one you're watching from, and hit the smash the like button and lick the smash button on both of our channels. Links to everything is down in the description as always.
Mm-hmm. If you want to catch these shows live, we do them Sundays at 4 p.m. ET. And we also do our In the Inquiry show where we review Steam store pages Mondays at 4 as well.
Yeah, and you've got your new book.
Yep. If you want to know more about horror design, be sure to check out Game Design Deep Dive Horror, now out where basically everywhere books are being sold. And tune in for Game Design Deep Dive free to play sometime in 2022.
Yep.
But that is going to do it. So, everyone, have a great rest of your Sunday. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where is in the art and science of games. Until then, take care.
See ya.